The weather turned brutal the moment we thought it couldn't. The snow came down harder, driven sideways by a wind that never stopped howling. December 24, 1944, the day the frost finally sank its claws into our sanity. We'd been ordered to reinforce positions near Bütgenbach, east of Elsenborn Ridge. The Germans were pressing there with everything they had left. Tanks, infantry, armor divisions wearing rags for winter coats, desperate enough to die for a few miles of road. The brass said we had to hold. There was no if, just hold. The truck ride to the front felt like being locked in a freezer made of steel and diesel. The wind sliced through the canvas flaps and found every gap in your clothes. Benson and I sat shoulder to shoulder in the back, clutching our rifles to our chests like lifelines. Every so often he'd rub his hands and say, "If I live to see spring, I'm never complaining about Chicago winters again." We arrived at dusk to a shattered village half buried under snow. The place had been shelled so often that nothing stood higher than 10 feet. The church tower was gone. Only the bell lay in the street, cracked in half and half, frozen into the ice. It looked like the heart of the town had been stopped mid-beat. We were assigned a row of foxholes facing a bend in the road leading through the woods. That bend, the lieutenant said, was the approach to Malmedy, one of the key German routes. They'll come down that road or not at all, he told us, so we make sure they don't. Making sure turned out to mean turning a patch of frozen ground into a fortress. We strung miles of barbed wire that cracked in our hands from the cold. We stacked sandbags that froze solid overnight. Every shovel full of earth was a war against permafrost. The only sound beyond the wind was the hollow ring of metal striking stone and bone-deep exhaustion. When night came, we sat in our holes drinking melted snow from our canteens. It tasted of ash and iron. The wind moaned through the pines, carrying faint sounds, engines, maybe voices. Sometimes we'd think we heard the crunch of snow boots too close for comfort. Everyone jumped at shadows. The next morning the sky cleared, but the temperature dropped to something ungodly. Frost dusted our eyelashes. The barrels of our rifles stuck to our gloves. The medics came through and warned everyone about frostbite, as if warning could help. One guy in 2nd Platoon lost 2 toes that night. They said he didn't even feel it happen. By mid-afternoon the shelling started again. We ducked and prayed as mortars chewed the snow to black slush. The sound never lessened. It became a rhythm, pounding in your head until you stopped reacting at all. Then came the tanks. At first, it was just noise, a low growl rising beneath the wind. Then the tree line parted, and there they were, shadows moving through the smoke, the massive shapes of Panthers and Mark IVs grinding forward, whitewashed paint flaking off their hulls. Targets at 300. Red. Now our acting sergeant, after the lieutenant caught shrapnel, shouted down the line. "Bazooka teams, get ready!" Benson grabbed the launcher while I fed another round into the magazine. We waited. The tanks clanked closer, dragging infantry behind them like wolves shadowing giants. My breath came in foggy bursts that froze to my scarf. "Fire!" The rockets whooshed out and caught the second tank amidships. It lurched sideways, smoke pouring from its vents. Our guns opened up all along the trench line, tracers ripping the white haze apart. Bullets sparked off armor, churning clouds of snow. The Germans returned fire instantly. Machine guns swept the ridge. Mortars hammered. You could feel the concussion in your teeth. Men shouted, fell, kept reloading. The line bent but didn't break. One tank kept advancing even while burning, its turret creaking toward us. The heat melted the snow around it into steaming mud. Benson fired again. The rocket struck the tracks, blowing fire from beneath. The vehicle stopped dead, flames licking higher. The crew tried to climb out, and then another shell took them. The fight raged until dusk, then faded as suddenly as it began. When the smoke cleared, the road was a graveyard of metal and men. The wind resumed its endless song, carrying with it the bitter smell of burned fuel and cordite. We took stock. Half our platoon was gone, killed, wounded, missing. Benson still sat by his bazooka, staring at the destroyed tank. I touched his shoulder. "You good?" I asked. He nodded without looking at me. "They just keep coming," he said quietly. "Like the snow, you can push it away, but it always comes back." That night, the temperature dropped even further. 30 below, maybe worse. the kind of cold that steals your breath and makes your bones ache like glass. We ran out of rations 2 days later. The supply convoy was delayed by ice, ambushed somewhere near Malmedy. All we had left were frozen crackers and hard candy from Christmas care packages. It was Christmas Eve when I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone for hours. The whole line had gone silent, each man buried under layers of snow like coffins with breathing holes. Even the guns had gone quiet. Then, faintly, across the stillness, came the sound of singing. It took me a minute to recognize it, the faint melody of Silent Night. At first I thought someone on our line had lost their mind. Then I realized the voices were coming from across the field. The Germans were singing. Their voices drifted through the cold like ghosts. Low, solemn, almost beautiful. Benson listened beside me. "Crazy bastards," he said, half smiling. "Singing Christmas carols in a war. Maybe they need it as bad as we do," I said. He didn't answer, neither did I. When they finished, the forest returned to silence. Snowflakes fell so slowly you could almost count them. I remember thinking how something so quiet could feel heavier than any gunfire. The next morning, Christmas Day, we were still there, still cold, still hungry, still holding. We got word over the radio that Patton had broken through farther south, heading our way. Nobody cheered. We just nodded and watched the horizon, the color of pewter under a sky that never seemed to brighten. That afternoon, Benson and I shared the last chunk of chocolate he'd been saving since Normandy. We broke it in half, and he handed me the bigger piece. "Merry Christmas," he said. We laughed, small, weary laughter that didn't go very far in the wind, but for the first time in weeks it felt almost human.